My name is Gary Cameron. Before I retired, I worked for Royal Dutch Shell Oil and Gas Company for 37 years and 6 months, domestically and internationally. I retired in November 2018. I now reside predominantly in Naples, Florida, where my primary residence is. And then I share time with my wife in Stevensville, Montana, and Big Sky Country. I graduated in 1981 with a business degree in focus on management. I began my career in Houston, Texas in June of 1981 as a young professional landman working for Royal Dutch Shell in the Rocky Mountain Division. And over the next 37 years, I ended up in international negotiations in predominantly the Middle East. I worked upstream commercial negotiations, working in Syria, Yemen, Egypt, Algeria, Jordan, and then I had some project work in Russia. Domestically, I worked in Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, Washington State, New Mexico, and Utah. So my final role with Shell just happened to be in the same department that I started in with Shell in 1981 as a landman. So my last role, I was the U.S. onshore land manager for Royal Dutch Shell in the domestic U.S. land operations in the United States. So that was my last role. Preceding that, it was a mixed bag between being a landman, negotiating oil and gas leases with ranchers, farmers, bankers, companies, domestically, purchase and sale agreements domestically. And then I spent 22 years of my career working international agreements, predominantly in the Middle East, but those were upstream commercial negotiation roles. So my responsibility was drafting and negotiating oil and gas agreements that I would then negotiate either with the state oil companies or the ministries of that particular country, of course, in conjunction with my colleagues, technically, financially, and legal colleagues. So as a U.S. onshore land manager, which is my last role for 5 years, I had 42 landmen reporting to me, again, responsible for oil and gas lease acquisitions, negotiating commercial agreements, and that could be with joint venture companies such as Exxon, Anadarko, any of the majors or any of the independent companies, teaching young landmen by going through their own agreements, where the pitfalls were, where there were drafting considerations that they needed to take into consideration, anything related to oil and gas titles, curative. Also, I had landmen in the field that were responsible for surface use agreements. So these are folks that are actually working with ranchers and farmers in wherever Shell had operations for getting access to utility lines, being able to lay roads, put in roads, lay pipelines, put in central production facilities. So all of that particular commercial activity was in the field locations. And then again, I had about probably 26 of the landmen were in the Houston office that were looking after commercial agreements and either with joint venture agreements like joint operating agreements, purchase and sale agreements when we were buying or selling, and then working with the technical groups to look for opportunities, how we were going to pick up or sell acreage positions within the U.S. There's two sides to that, I think. From a commercial point of view, when I was not in a managerial position, and it was predominantly working overseas because 22 of the years were working international agreements. And the caliber of people that I was able to work with inside a Shell and outside, but predominantly inside a Shell, the intellectual horsepower that Shell has in different functions, technical, finance, legal. I work with all those type of folks. And when you're working with some really high-powered analytical, technical, commercial minds, your game gets stronger. So that was that part of my career. From a managerial point of view, I think the reward with that is working with young professionals because that was late in my career and they were starting their career. And it gave me the opportunity to, spend time with a lot of those young land professionals and give them coaching, advice, mentoring, etc. So that was a different reward, but it was, because I was out of the pen in hand role and I was more in the mentoring, coaching, managing, leadership role. And that was just a wonderful transition during my final 5 years. So I think from an international point of view, my family and I lived 16 years overseas. So I was on the move every 4 years, unless my role was extended. The expectation was that you move on every 4 years and then you're chasing another role within Shell. So there was that. My family and I lived in Damascus, Syria for 10 years, lived in The Hague, the Netherlands for 7 years, lived in Billings, Montana for 2 years, lived in Anchorage, Alaska for 5 years, and lived in Houston, Texas for 13 years. So when you're moving quite a bit and you're constantly on the move and you have different cultures, different languages, and so forth, at times that got to be a bit challenging and at times a bit stressful on the family as well. I think from where I came at in my final years with Shell, over a 37-year career, a lot of things can change. And of course, at my place in life, I'm a bit probably old school. So my expectations are quite high. And managing 42 young land professionals who are predominantly millennials and so forth, sometimes that can have a little bit of a contrast in terms of meeting expectations and so forth. So that had its own trials and tribulations, but it was always good fun. So here's a few thoughts, because when you begin a career, wherever it is, first of all, I think young professionals need to be really realistic about where they're going to want to be and how long it takes to get there and so forth. Be realistic, because a career, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And what I mean by that is, you got to put the hard yards in to get to where you need to be, and it's very competitive, especially these days. I think given the undergraduate degrees and then the graduate degrees that complement the undergraduate degrees, there's some really good talent out there. So, I think that the one thing that you can look at is there's a lot of things that will be outside of your control as you begin a career with any company. But what is inside of your control is your own behaviors. And when you begin your career, think about, what is the reputation that I want to have tied to my name and my performance? And so when you think about that, and you should, the characteristics, the behaviors that you want to display, and there was a lot of mentoring and advice that I would give to the young professionals. It's competitive. So be a team player, because everybody wants a team player. Be disciplined at what you do, show up. If you make a mistake, own it. Don't dodge it. And that I'll put in the context of, in these days, in terms, what they call a player versus a victim. So be a player, show up every day, own the work that you're responsible for. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it, move on, but don't dodge the responsibility for your mistakes, own it. So I think about that. I think about things like be humble, because there will be a lot of opportunities that you get to be in some limelight on different teams, but be humble. Many times I would see folks, whenever the cameras came along with big signing ceremonies, everybody wants to be on the stage. And I'm old school. And I had, my dad taught me to be humble, regardless of how successful you are. So be humble. Think about that. I also, through my career and probably later on in my career, I stumbled across what I think are some really good attributes in the Code of the West. And I encourage each of you to take the time and go look at the Code of the West. And so what you're going to find, and I think if you live your professional life with the attributes and the behaviors that are embedded in the Code of the West, live each day with courage. Be respectful. When you make a promise, keep it. Take pride in your work. Be tough, but be fair. Know where to draw the line. Remember, some things aren't for sale. Ride for the brand. Now, to me, ride for the brand means I'm riding for the corporation. They're the one that's signing my paycheck. And I want to emphasize in that context, the priorities by which I approach that for me is, and I think everybody should look at it, family first, the corporation second, the team that you serve on third, and the last person is yourself. And it goes back to my earlier comment on being a team player. If you look at any sporting event, in a team sport, they win as a team. Yeah, there's some great individuals and great either athletic talent, intellectual talent in the corporate world, but they win as a team. So I think about the Code of the West, and I think about, those type of behaviors. If you can model those in your own day-to-day activities, and you can help others in that path, those will help you go very long ways through a very successful career. Approaching your career as a marathon, not a sprint, is important because, and I know things are different these days because you've got a lot of competition out there. There's not a lot of companies out there that are under a pension system anymore. There's dual incomes to try and make things meet. There's a lot of challenges out there. It's different than when I came through 37, 38 years ago. But just take each day in stride, work your tail off, show up. And one very important thing is have fun along the way. Don't be afraid to fail. When you stumble, pick yourself up, and I've done it many times during my career. I've either chewed somebody out as a manager and walked away and said, bloody hell, I could have probably handled that differently, and I learned. Well, if I made a mistake in a commercial agreement that I needed to tighten up the language and it bit me later, I can promise you that the next time I came across those language provisions, I was tighter with the language. So don't be afraid to fail. And those are growth opportunities. And don't be timid. Be aggressive, be assertive to go out there and give it your very best. So I had an undergraduate degree. I don't have the horsepower that you folks right now have with a degree in, let's say, petroleum engineering that's backed up by MBA, a petroleum land management degree, and it's backed up by a law degree, a finance degree that's backed up with an MBA. You have the skills analytically. Now go apply them professionally and take the Code of the West with you and have a fun ride because you're going to be successful. So if I can go 37 years and 6 months with one of the best oil companies in the world and make it to a senior management position, writing those attributes and displaying them and working as hard as I possibly could, knowing the company didn't owe me anything, but expected for me to deliver every day. And that's what I tried to do my very best. So take that, digest it, think about how you want to proceed with your own professional career. And remember, you'll always be a cowboy.